kick us off for the hearing on Senate Bill 468.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 468 relates to tax levy rates and would prohibit cities and counties that grant or approve certain property tax exemptions or tax increment financing from exceeding their revenue neutral rates for property tax purposes. Specifically, the bill would amend 792988 to provide that on and after January 1 of 2026, no tax rate in excess of the revenue neutral rate shall be levied by the governing body of a city or county when such city or county granted, approved, or otherwise authorized during the preceding calendar year any property tax exemption pursuant to either Section 13 of Article 11 of the Kansas Constitution, which is kind of generally referred to as the EDX exemption, or pursuant to KSA 12-1740 et sec and 79201A, second or 24th, for property constructed or purchased with the proceeds of revenue bonds, and that is the exemption that's sometimes referred to as an industrial revenue bond exemption, or IRBX. The other item is tax increment financing, and those are any provision of Article 17 of Chapter 12 of the Kansas statutes annotated, or any other provision of law. And in such case, if a city or county is limited by this provision, such governing body would be limited to generating the same amount of property tax revenue as levied the previous tax year. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee will welcome our first conferee, Representative Sean Tarwater. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Okay, good morning. Chairman Tyson and committee, thanks for hearing me out today on this bill. This bill kind of came about in collaboration between Senator Tyson and I. We bounce things off each other every once in a while. And one day I was a little bit upset about the fact that I continue to hear from people about property tax issues, coupled with the fact that we also have lots of meetings in Johnson County area about developments that my constituents are dead set against, but yet they continue to happen, and they a lot of times come with property tax abatements, and then they turn around and raise the taxes on my constituents. So I am a state representative in District 27, and I'm here in that capacity on behalf of 26,000 constituents of mine that somehow don't get heard. And this bill's pretty simple, and it simply says, if you are going to give property tax away to a developer, then you don't have the right to raise my taxes or my constituents' taxes. Pretty simple. We all know property tax is the number one issue when we knock on doors and go to coffees in town halls. It's always property tax, number one. Yet they're never listened to. And there's not a whole lot we can do up here about property tax. It's mostly at the local level. And these same constituents they don't like all these big projects that are being done, and they use their property taxes to pay for them. I'm one of a few proponents up here, but I do represent 26,000 individuals. There are about 50 opponents today. None of them are representing constituents, your constituents, that are against property tax. There's not a lot we can do. This is one thing we can do. And it's not lost on me that there's always a but for. This project wouldn't happen but for this incentive. Well, where I'm from, I think that this project wouldn't happen but for the incentive exists, and I'm going to wait for the incentive before I break ground. And unfortunately, I think that's what we've come to on this. If a local authority wants to manage their money properly, they can certainly give property tax abatements. But I find it hard to believe that you can give somebody free money and then raise everybody else's taxes. So I'd ask you guys today to take this opportunity to represent your constituents. Somebody has to do it, and this is the one thing we can do to keep property taxes in check. We all made that promise. It's time to put your vote where your mouth is. And that's all I've got today. Thank you. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Representative. We'll take questions right away. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really struggling with this bill, and I want to give you a couple reasons, and then I want to get your response to it. The first is, this to me is just a core local control issue. And I don't think any of us would want the federal government telling the state of Kansas how we can or can't use our economic development incentives. And that's yet exactly what this bill does when it comes to local governments. It tells them how to use their economic development incentives. The second challenge with this bill is that there is plenty of recourse that folks at the local level have. These decisions are all being made by elected officials. And in our area, we've had local elections that have been very vigorously contested on the issue of whether or not economic development incentives were or were not being appropriately used. And folks had the chance to campaign on that issue for or against. They had a chance to campaign on the issue of revenue neutral for or against. And then voters in those communities went to the ballot box and they made decisions. So it's not if citizens are unhappy with these decisions that are being made at a local level, they have recourse. They should vote for different local elected officials. I also think this bill just misunderstands how things like TIFs are used. I think that we can talk about that in more detail.
Do you have a question?
I want to lay out my objections to get his response to it, because I think that these are worthwhile points, and I would, maybe I could be convinced otherwise, but I think what I'm laying out are real challenges. It also just reveals sort of, in our area, I think a lot of this development was
Senator,
just going to go.
we're in a hearing to hear the bill. We're not debating the bill right now. What is your question for the
Okay, so one is the local control issue. Two, I think in our area, a lot of these projects would just go to Kansas City, Missouri. And three, I don't think revenue neutral works in growing areas like ours, because if you have 7 or 8% inflation and then you have 2 or 3% growth, revenue neutral is basically a 10% cut year over year in roads, in fire, in police. And I don't think that that's what a lot of my citizens want. But again, if they want to vote for that, they can. So those are the 3 areas that I think are just real flaws with this bill. And I'd appreciate your response.
Well, there's, Madam Chair, there's a lot to unpack there. And I kind of have a short attention span, so I've pretty much forgotten most of what you said. But let me take a stab at it. The first thing is local control. I don't think that anywhere in this bill it says they can't use this incentive. This incentive will still exist. It's just that and by the way, TIFs don't have anything to do with property tax. That's a whole different incentive. But if you're going to give property tax away, you can't then turn around and tell the public that we are broke and we need to raise your property taxes. All it says, you got to stick to the revenue neutral rate if you do this. And I think they can do that. We've got a spending issue. And when it comes to voters, I agree with you. We should move the election to November so everybody can get out and vote. I think we'll have a lot different returns then. Also, they vote for us, and every one of us, I guarantee you, said we were going to do everything we can to help with property taxes. And so, I'm thinking of the voters.
Senator Reddy. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have heard here from at least, I haven't counted, but at least 15 to 20 city elected officials. You were saying are you saying that we are the only ones that represent constituents, or do these elected officials also represent their constituents?
I'm saying that we're here to represent our constituents, and they are here to raise taxes. They're not here for their constituents.
May I have a follow-up, please?
Yes, Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of, I would say all of them, all of these elected officials have a smaller population that they represent than representatives, or in most incidences. I'm not saying like in Wichita or Johnson County, I don't know how many they represent, but most of them see their constituents in the grocery store, in their churches, in their schools more often than we do when we represent an entire county. So is it possible that they are hearing from their constituents about property taxes as well, but they may also be understanding the incentive processes for businesses?
Okay. I don't see any elected officials here other than me and you. I see a lot of bureaucrats here that want the money, they see the money. And Senator Corson, you're right. Our elections are in November. What I meant to say is to move the elections to the year that we all run so that more people can get out and vote.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative, thank you for bringing this today. I appreciate this getting teed up for a debate, because I guess what I want to discuss is that this is, to me, has the focus on the locals, and I agree. That's a significant part of where this action is at, is the local units of government granting the property tax. Tell me, in your opinion, does the state ever grant commercial property tax abatements or relief, either directly or indirectly?
I'm sorry?
Does the state, through economic incentives, are you aware of the state ever granting commercial property tax abatements or relief?
Senator, I'm going to refer that question to legislative research, and they'll respond.
We'll provide a list of all of the statutory property tax exemptions.
Thank you. And before committee, I requested a list by county on the exemptions so that it would be a refresher, a reminder for this committee. Senator Holland.
I guess the point I'm trying to make, Madam Chair, and I think Eddie's just answered affirmatively that yes, the state does. My point being is that, you know,
sure the state abates property taxes, so we are looking into.
Okay, so let me back up a second. If it doesn't do it directly, is the state, quote unquote, part of the stakeholders here with responsibility from the perspective of us when we do things, and I didn't vote for it, but when we do things like Panasonic, okay, and we drop in massive incentives to an outside company to come in, okay, then we have our Commerce Department working with local government officials to provide those complete deals. And I guess my question is that, to me, I see the state being just as complicit in this deal, particularly in the large deals, as well as our local officials. And so I guess my question is that, how do you put some of this onus, even if the state isn't directly providing it, how do you put some of the onus back on the state? Because in effect, the state is itself, we collectively as a body, we're causing some of the problems when it comes to increasing residential property tax burdens.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, and I'm glad you brought it up, because we do have incentive programs here at the state level, and the Panasonic deal was one of the companies that came on the Apex program, and they do get something from the state. They get income tax credits, and they get payroll credits from the state. They got no sales tax from the state. Those are all things that we're trying to lower up here, by the way. We're trying to lower income tax
So
up
my
here.
point, Representative, is that it's the package deal. So you better believe that the Commerce Department is working with the local units of government to also give them the property tax relief they're looking for to do those things. I'm just saying, I think we're complicit in some of these things as well. And then the second question I have, Madam Chair, is that if we really want to get tough on granting the property tax exemptions, okay, to me, why are you tying it to basically the mechanism we have here through the revenue neutral? It seems to me, why doesn't the state just say arbitrarily, look, locals, look, whoever, okay, you can only grant so much commercial property tax relief per the structure of your property class assets, period. Okay, and get rid of this shell game of where we're constantly pushing property tax burdens more and more onto residential property owners. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I'm not quite sure I understand that question.
Well,
But
I think he's debating the bill.
No, I'm not, Madam Chair, I'm not debating. The question is, I'm saying that why does this bill go far enough? Why didn't you instead propose basically just regulating, just period, the amount of commercial property tax abatements, say, based on a formula of just how much they can do, period, and don't tie it to revenue neutral?
well, because I do believe in local control. And they should be able to give as many as they want, but they also shouldn't be able to turn around and raise our property taxes.
Any other questions, committee? So I would like to thank Representative Tarwater, and I would remind the committee that he's the one that brought us the great idea of the 20 mil on the 20K exemption. That had never been raised since 1997, and I appreciate your efforts in looking out for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Senator. We're all doing as much as we can up here to help with property taxes. Number one issue. Thanks.
Absolutely. Bye. Thank you, Representative. Committee, our next conferee is Michael Austin from Americans for Prosperity. Welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michael Austin, Legislative Director for Americans for Prosperity. You should have testimony by our State Director, Elizabeth Patton, so I do apologize on her behalf for not being with you today, but I figured that it's Valentine's Day, so you would all love to see me again, as you did yesterday. We are here in support of Senate Bill 468 for many different reasons, but probably one of the most important reasons is to kind of piggyback off of Representative Tarwater, where we acknowledge that when it comes to tax bases, what we're seeing happening in localities is that we're kind of treating it like a game of Jenga, where you have a tower of sorts of your tax base, and every time you provide one of these incentives or abatements, you're taking a piece of that block out, and then what do you have to do with that block? You have to put it back on top. So the more holes you take out of that tower, the higher the tower has to be. And eventually, as you know, that game goes, it gets so tall that unfortunately it can even collapse. And so this is an attempt to stop the tax tower from collapsing, so to speak, by allowing by telling localities that if they allow for these abatements, the revenue neutral rate has to stay steady. If you're going to be growing that tax base already by bringing those businesses in, it should provide an incentive for localities that if they do these economic development deals, that they make sure that the juice is worth the squeeze. They make sure that the amount of tax revenue coming into the locality is more than the amount that they're paying out in terms of abatements. And that would keep the revenue neutral rate arguably steady. And then, of course, just speaks to the overall issue of property taxes and the need to get this under control. Now, of course, Madam Chair, I know you have many other conferees today, so if it's okay with you, I will stop my time and allow for any questions.
That is much appreciated, Michael. Thank you. We do have your written testimony. Committee, any questions? Senator Ray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want clarification for tax increment finance districts. My understanding is for a tax increment finance TIF district, there isn't a property tax rebate. Is that correct?
The way that I currently understand TIFs, that would be correct.
So I just want to know why they are part of this bill, since there isn't a rebate involved in that.
That I cannot answer, as I am not the person who either introduced this bill or drafted it.
Thank you. We can ask research when we're debating the bill on that. We can find out that answer for you if we work the bill. Thank you. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Isn't there kind of a time lapse issue with this? Because a lot of times if a incentive is granted, it's paid out over a number of years, or the abatement goes through a number of different years. So it seems like there's a mismatch between deciding to use an economic development incentive. By the time that incentive is used by the business or by the developer, it might be a number of years down the road, but we're saying you have to keep it revenue neutral in the year that you make that decision, and it just seems like there's a time mismatch. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that statement, Senator Corson. I see what you're saying there. I would also add that while abatements usually do run on a certain horizon, 5 years, however many years afterwards, the economic development, the economic impact also runs on that same horizon. So why I say that to tell you that the effect that it's going to have on the tax base will also continue on, and I think that's why the revenue neutral rate, is something that really should follow. As property taxes come into a locality, the revenue neutral rate does what it can to lower that mill levy to keep those collections constant. So if there is continued economic injection from having this business come into the area, that would also play into what the revenue neutral rate will be in subsequent years.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, our next conferee is Linnell Griffith. Linnell, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just an average citizen. Don't know how to work the mic, but I'm getting there. Before I go into my prepared comments, as I've been listening, I just want to mention about local control. As an average citizen, of course, I'm about local control. Let me tell you a story. I went to one R&R hearing, and the room was packed, and the overflow room was packed. And people talked and talked, saying, please don't raise our property taxes. This is a big issue. It hurts. And some people get taxed right out of their homes, and I've heard those stories too, and it's heartbreaking. There were, during that meeting, 3 people that said, yeah, go ahead, but they were employees of the government, of the local government. But they raised our taxes just the same. So we need some extra help to rein it in, because yes, it is an issue of local control, but they're not listening to us. We put them in office, and sometimes, politicians don't always make good on the promise they make when they're campaigning. So anyway, thank you. Again, I'm Linnell Griffith. I'm from Topeka, and I am in favor of these proposed changes to Senate Bill 468. Now, I do appreciate the revenue neutral rate statute and that it provides the public a forum to better express the consent of the government of the governed, or in many cases, the disagreement of what is about to happen. Our nation's founding principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are grounded in inalienable rights that all are created equal and subject to irrefutable natural laws for society, including private property rights and thou shalt not steal. While paying taxes, I know, to government so that government can secure our individual rights is a necessary endeavor, it's also a less painful endeavor when we people know that those funds are being spent for the good of society, that everyone, nearly everyone, will benefit either in the short term or the long term. It's necessary, understand that. But now property taxes, they're a whole nother animal. If indeed we as U.S. citizens uphold the right to acquire and sell private property, how is it that something a citizen owns can be taken from them by the government if they don't pay the government a seemingly ever-increasing, unrestrained sum of money in order to keep what he or she already has, already owns? Are we renting our property from the government? Now, again, I'm just an average citizen. I'm not a lobbyist. It takes a lot of effort and time to be able to come to hearings, and a lot of people don't have the flexibility in their schedules to do that. So I'm asking you to do whatever you can to rein in property taxes. If a taxing entity grants reliefs to certain groups, then that taxing entity, again, should be restricted from raising taxes on everyone else. Now, even if the prediction is that property tax abatement for some business will increase tax revenue from the sales created from that business, the regular tax-paying citizen should in no way be responsible for that risk. The taxing entity should be held to the revenue neutral for the benefit of all. It is the government's job to protect citizens from being exploited. We shouldn't have to hold the risk for welfare to corporations. I'm not saying don't do it. The bill doesn't say you can't do that. But don't make your everyday hardworking Americans pay for that risk. It should work on its own. And so I ask you to do what you can to rein in property tax increases. If a taxing entity, again, grants relief to certain groups, that taxing entity should be restricted from raising taxes on everyone else. Regular people, we have to stay within our means. If we can't afford something, we don't just arbitrarily say more money in. We can't just raise our own profit simply because we declare it so. And yet the government, at this point, can raise taxes on private property without our consent. So please, do what you can to represent your constituents.
Thank you. Linnell, would you stand for questions?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Griffith, for being here. I think it's always great when average citizens come up here to testify and have the courage to do so. So a few questions in terms of, I agree, primarily local governments levy property taxes in the state, and so that's where, in my opinion, the responsibility lies, because they are elected. Topeka just had a local election. How many of the people were reelected in November?
I'm sorry. Oh, for city council? I think 2. I'm sorry.
Were any of them, I guess my question
Yeah,
is, were any of them voted out of office?
Yeah.
So if you said you had 2 rooms full of people who were almost unanimously opposed to the tax
This was for
increase.
the county, not the city. So we're talking about 2 different
Oh, I'm sorry.
groups
I
of
just said
people
city. I
here.
apologize. Okay, so
No, it's fine.
I guess now we're talking about county,
It's
which
the
are up next. This
county, county elections are this year. Half of the city elections were this year. County elections are in 24. So we're talking 23, and we're talking 24. So it doesn't really match up.
So you mentioned that you guys had 2 rooms full of people very upset, and the local government decided to raise taxes anyway. I guess my question is, that's where the responsibility lies. What efforts? I guess my question is, are you
Better
going
people to run.
Maybe you should run for office. But I think that's where we have elections. Local governments are held accountable by you, the local taxpayer, and I think that's where an effort has to be made. Anyway, I think that's where I'll just leave it there. You threw me off with the whole city council thing. I thought the
No, that's fine. May I jump in real quick in terms of, it?
So we're going to have to get back on the bill because we do have other conferees.
Okay.
I'm going to, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just curious. You said RFR. What part of the state are you from? What county?
I'm from Shawnee County.
Oh, okay. So just a quick question for you. Do you think the state is complicit in any of this? As far as, do you view your local officials just working in a vacuum, or do you think potentially we have policies and statutes up here that even indirectly might exacerbate the property tax shift?
I think as a whole, it's the role of government to keep its citizens from being exploited. I think ever increasing property taxes are a way that average citizens are exploited, especially when some businesses are given breaks in that, and then we hold the risk. I think that's unfair. And I think it's only fair with the changes, with the edits to this, that, just rein it in. I'm not saying get rid of it, but just stop making us hold the risk and increase it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here this morning. So when local governments, we say when they raise property taxes, it's through a mill levy. So do you know if yours was raised because they increased the mill levy or because of evaluations that came in from the appraiser?
Senator,
I believe it was both.
We changed that process. We'll explain it to you afterwards. They have to vote to go above revenue neutral. Valuations do not increase property taxes anymore. It is a vote, and they know who raised the mill levy.
I think I understand, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we got to get back on the bill. We do have some opponents that we need to hear from also. So thank you. Thank you, Linnell. Committee, we do have another proponent online, Charlotte O'Hara. Charlotte, we have about 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Charlotte, we can hear you. And we have your.
Oh, good. I know that there was some problems before. Well, I think the issue is that no one has any grasp as to the level that the problem of these tax incentives are presenting. In 2022, we had a total of $91 million diverted from public coffers to the pockets of big developers. And that was broken down to 33.18 million in for TIF and 58 million and some change for IRBs. The total amount of property
Charlotte, we have those numbers and we're giving those out to the committee.
Oh, do you have all those numbers?
Could you please state? And I'm sorry, we've only got a couple minutes.
No, that's problem.
Okay.
That's no problem. You have my testimony and you can read it, but I agree with Senator Holland. This is not just a local issue. This is state statutes that are allowing this, and it is eviscerating our tax base in Johnson County. I mean, to divert $91 million from the developers, diverting that to them from the taxpayers. I mean, this is a huge problem, and it is increasing the taxes. If the thesis of tax incentives were really true, our property taxes wouldn't continue to go up and up and up and up. I think that this is a global issue that needs to be addressed at the state level. I think if you would get an annual report on what all of these tax incentives, state tax incentives, whether they're peak or HPIP, whether they're local, whether they're IRBs or tax increment finance districts, or community improvement districts, transportation improvement districts, et cetera, et cetera. If you actually had an annual audit as to what this was costing, I think that would bring the focus in that it's too much. In 2012, our TIF district diversion was only 7.4 million, and in 2022 it was 33 million. It is really hurting us. In Johnson County, we had to send up $7.5 million.
I'm sorry. She used to be Representative O'Hara. I didn't mean to cut you off, but would you be willing to stand for questions? We do have your written testimony.
Absolutely. I have a lot of information.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, County Commissioner, for being here with us via WebEx. So respond to the opponents that are going to testify. We have a deputy city administrator. We have someone from the Planning and Development Department. We have someone from the Director of External Affairs. The Overland Park letter came from just the city of Overland Park, not a person. So why is the testimony coming from employees of cities and counties, but not from elected officials? Could you give us that opinion, since you are...
Well, I think, right. Well, the elected officials don't want to step in the hot water. They don't want to say, hey, we're going to stand up against the corporate welfare and say enough is enough. I mean, Prairie Fire, look at Prairie Fire, Star Bonds, and it defaulted on them. That's 135th and Knoll, the Gold Coast of Johnson County. These tax incentives, this whole strategy is so broken. It's so broken, but the employees of the cities, I mean, this is what they do. They churn them out. Do they ever come out? Does the staff ever come out and say, "Oh no, we shouldn't do this"? No, it's just, this is the gravy train, and it's been like this for 30 years. And we just have to stand back and go, this is broken. We've got to fix it.
So thank you for your testimony. We're going to move on to the opponents or we're going to run out of time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay. So Dave Traubert has written testimony. Committee, our first opponent is Juliet Abdel from Topeka. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for being here. We had published a written testimony, and the written testimony actually captured 13 different communities outside of our own. The majority of them are chambers of commerces and economic development. Several of you on this committee also represent those individual communities. And I just wanted to speak to the point that I am a private sector hire. I am not employed by any municipality. So my lens is not going to reiterate the points that are in the letter. It's actually going to speak to you as a resident here in our community.
Could you please be brief? We have 4 other conferees, and I don't mean to cut you off. If we need to extend this, we will, because we want everyone to be.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer, as many of you are, that government closer to the people is best, and their ability to know the pulse of the community and its needs, and greater confidence is truly given when there is this public-private partnership. I personally moved here within the last 90 days out of state, and the 2 other communities I came from had a diversity of housing options and several mixed-use properties and developments. And when I considered Kansas, I looked at where I would live. The community I landed in was Wheatfield Village, and it is a community that has benefited from a TIF district. That is the only community in Topeka that actually has that structure of a mixed use and attracted me. And so from that perspective, it touches me personally because I see that value on a daily basis that we've had in our community. There have been comments around TIF today that actually have been really good for me to re-mention. That last session, Representative Estes actually requested an audit be done to oversee what TIFs are, their purpose, their function, their economic output that they've produced. The Legislative Audit Division is actually beginning that now, and that study is being undergone. And so I would urge the committee not to move forward on this and to actually reevaluate the results of that, truly understand the TIFs, and have that knowledge before we actually act on something without having those additional details. So hopefully that was brief enough. I thank you all for your time today.
That was great. Thank you. Any questions, committee? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It seems like we're getting sidetracked a little bit from the legislation. You do understand, because you mentioned here, options like TIF districts are valuable. That's part of a sentence. And then at the bottom, having access to these tools makes us more attractive. You do understand that Senate Bill 468 does not remove any of these incentives. Mm-hmm. They are still there. They're still available for use. It simply says you use them. You cannot bring in more money from taxpayers next year than you did this year. So I guess I'm a little bit confused as to why it seems like everyone keeps talking like we're eliminating these incentive programs, and that's not what this legislation does.
You're absolutely right. It does not specifically state that, but based on feedback that we've all heard from our communities, all the communities that are represented on that letter, and I'll defer to my counterparts in city and local municipalities, they will speak to the fact that they would be prohibited or unable to actually utilize those given the language that is stated there. So I'll defer to them as they administer TIFs and IRBs, but that is our united understanding of that.
So, Madam Chairman, they do not, again, I need to reiterate for everyone in the room's benefit, these do not eliminate these incentives. They are still there available for local units. But I guess I just am struggling with why there is opposition, because it almost sounds like, from what you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that local units of government want the incentives and then want to raise taxes. Mm-hmm. Is that a misstatement?
No, what I have just stated was that I'm going to defer to my counterparts that are in local governments that have reiterated in numerous communities the effect this would have and their ability to actually utilize these tools and, in essence, disable them from doing so. So I will have them provide that additional clarity.
That's fine. We'll move on, committee. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Tim Dannenberg from the City of Olathe, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I certainly do appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I will be very brief in deference to the others that wish to speak on this issue, but I do want to make a couple of points and hopefully some clarification for you, Senator. Olathe has the second lowest mill rate for city services in the state of Kansas. That was far, far from the case 20, 30 years ago when our local governing body realized that it was imperative that we aggressively attract commercial investment in our community. And we did so, and Olathe has used incentives over the years. And as a result, we have created a tax base that allows us to keep our taxes on our residents low, second lowest in the state. I'd also remind you in Olathe and many other cities, the city tax percentage on your property tax is only 20%. 80% of your property tax is going to other entities. So I would like to remind you of that point, that I think if you're looking for a case where if you're going to be aggressive and take advantage of tools to create economic growth and development, you need to look no further than Olathe, which has probably over the last 30 years, I'm guessing, cut our mill rate in half for local services, and that's because we have increased our commercial base. Commercial property pays significantly more than residential property. Our council's goal is always...
I appreciate your sales pitch for Olathe, but that isn't on the bill. Are there any questions for this conferee?
Sure, and may I clarify? The concerns about revenue neutral as it relates to us is this is growth. This is an impact on services. It's an impact on infrastructure. It is adding costs to the existing tax base. And if we don't capture new revenue from it, there's not benefit to us incentivizing and bringing these types of projects in. And I'm happy to provide, after the hearing, happy to provide any clarification on how TIFs work.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Rhiannon Friedman? I may have mispronounced your name. I apologize. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rhiannon Friedman. Perfect. I'm the Planning and Development Director with the City of Topeka. So thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to give some brief testimony. I set up written submittal as well, so I'll be quick this morning. But as everyone's aware here, the City of Topeka uses both tax increment financing, TIF districts, and industrial revenue bonds as strategic and important economic development tools. The city, in partnership with local developers and national developers alike, have used these, TIF districts to transform blighted areas. As one of our friends mentioned, Wheatfield Village is a great example of an area that had been, significantly blighted over time, and this allowed a local developer to be able to come in and take a chance and an opportunity on a corner of town that might not have been able to happen before. So in doing so, if you've drove by the area, it's a wonderful project that I think most citizens would say is something that we're proud of and has attracted new citizens and new businesses that help grow our tax base in the community. I think something that I hear about a lot with a background in economic development is the need to continue to push for public-private partnership. So when people are coming to us and they're reaching out to the city and they're looking for public-private partnership in ways that they can invest in the community, this is a tool that we're using. We're talking about TIFs, and there's a lot of analysis that goes into that process as well. This is not something that's taken lightly. Correct staff is, analyzing it. We're making sure that we're not over-incentivizing projects, that we're being strategic, and that it's done in a way that will bring the most impact to the community. I also know that, we trust in our elected officials and understand that they represent the communities that they were elected in to help make those decisions in the best way that impacts those folks. So thank you.
Will you stand for question?
Absolutely.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, welcome Maddie Wedlock. I'm sorry, Maddie. Welcome to the Tax Committee. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Committee. Maddie Waldeck, Deputy City Administrator for the City of Basehor. I'll be very brief. We're the second fastest growing city in Kansas. We have provided exactly one property tax abatement for a project in our community. It was a 75% tax abatement for a memory care facility expansion because our elected officials believe that project was a worthy project, and our aging community could, if they were unable to age in place, they had a quality facility to be able to go to and still remain in the community. Just for some numbers, that incentive was about $30,000 per year for a 10-year period. If we were required to go to revenue neutral rate in this last budget, that would have been a decrease of about $450,000. And what we say to our community is, if we keep the mill rate flat, it's about $13 a month for our existing properties. 2/3 of our increase is due to growth. Is $13 a month worth it to you to get trails and parks and all these quality of life amenities? And thanks to the revenue neutral rate legislation, we have a greater opportunity to engage our community. And what we heard in the last budget cycle was the overwhelming, yeah, $13 a month is worth it to us to get nice parks and trails and these things that we can see in these other communities. So I stand here on behalf of our elected officials in the city of Basehor, and Senator Tyson, I'd be honored to stand for questions.
Thank you, Maddie, so much. Committee, any questions? So, Maddie, I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You've been great to work with. I would ask that you would take a look at this legislation and see if there's something we could probably, that we could work on together to find an agreement some way to figure out how we can make this work. Because we are not canceling these programs by any means, even if this does pass. And we just want to make sure that it doesn't force a property tax increase for others.
It would be my honor.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Committee, we do have one last conferee, Spencer Duncan. Welcome back to the Tax Committee.
Thank you. I will
And
be brief.
he is an elected official.
I am. That was my
Which
make
hat?
2 points, and that's
Which
my
hat do you have on?
Today I'm here on behalf of the League of Municipalities, but let's not say no elected official wasn't in the room and willing to stand in front of you, because I always will and I always have. And honestly, outside of Representative Corbett, I can honestly stand here. I have a very proven track record in my community of being a staunch ally of reducing property taxes, and I will continue to be that. And if I think this bill would help, I would tell you that. My second point is this. You're conflating two issues. There may be concerns, frustrations with the R&R process, and there are certainly frustrations and concerns with the tax incentive process. I agree to both of those. This bill puts them together in a way that truly is unfair to the cities in this respect. And Eric Stafford himself has stood here and told you businesses go into communities and say, give it to me or else I'm leaving. And it backs cities against the wall to say, if I don't get this, I am not going to get this business to either expand or come to my community. I don't have much choice if I really want to do that. By pitting that against the R&R process, you are putting cities in the position of having to make those tough decisions when they shouldn't have to. There's other things we need to do to improve the property tax. We are not the only taxing entities. I'd like to remind you of that. It's time to look at all those other taxing entities. So this does not get at either of the two underlying issues that are really of concern here today. And we're happy to work on both of those. We just don't think this gets us there. Thank you.
So thank you. I have a question for you, and it's not a city, it's a county.
Okay, I'll try.
The county gave a $34 million property tax abatement, $34 million to a Chinese company, and then turned around and had one of the largest increases in the state on their constituents. How do we address that issue?
So don't knock me for maybe referencing Senator Holland, okay? Don't hold that against me. But his comment earlier was, not that I like it wholeheartedly, but is a better approach at looking at the incentive that we're giving and what those should be, and if there should be limits, and versus a system that holds it against the revenue neutral process.
So fair statement, and we will take a look at that. Committee, any other questions? I look forward to Senator Baumgardner.
So just as a clarification, are you saying that these entities, public entities, should give the public a vote on something like that?
On something like a tax incentive?
Mm-hmm. We're going to give this tax incentive, but it's going to mean your taxes are going up.
I think that's tough just from this perspective, and I haven't thought about that. But I think if a business walks in and you say, great, we're going to give you this, but it has to go to a public vote, their first reaction is to be, no, we're not going to go get involved with that, and then they're going to leave anyway. So part of our frustration here, we share the same frustration, and I love the business community, but is with some of the business community of sort of making those demands upon us and putting us in that position.
So doesn't this help kind of have your back, if you will, to say to the business community, we want to, but we've got to stay revenue neutral. We want you here, and you will be more welcome if we can remain revenue neutral.
I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I've never thought about the impact of that, and I'm happy to follow up with you on a thought of that. I really have never. But again, I think there's a better way to deal with these in the silos that they exist in, as opposed to conflating them together.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The revenue neutral rate, correct me if I'm wrong, simply says you brought in this amount of money last year from property taxes, you can bring in that exact same amount, and that's it. So it sounds like you're saying that a municipality cannot year to year, at least 1 year, keep their spending at the same level as they had the last year. Is that what you're saying? Because
some do.
It sounds like all the conferees are saying we need the ability to raise taxes every single year.
Well, I'm going to try to be, first of all, I don't know what the market's going to do. What's inflation look like? What are my expenses? Road costs have skyrocketed, right? That has to be a factor in my budgeting process. The state of Kansas does not take a revenue neutral rate vote.
I wish we did.
I understand, but I mean, you collect the same, with all due respect, the same thing you criticize us for every year, the state is doing every year without even a hearing or a conversation.
Does that on 1.5 mil, and we are trying to get rid of that 1.5
And I understand that, but I mean, so what's good for the goose, right? So some levity in us.
So we're gonna have to cut that. We're gonna lose the room. And what's good for the goose, and I don't understand this. The cities and the counties exist because of the state government. So do you understand that? You exist because of state statute.
There are also 8, for instance, in Shawnee County, there are 8 property tax organizations. So it isn't just a city and county issue. There are 6 other organizations who have the ability to collect property taxes in some of these counties, and I don't believe they also get the same sort of scrutiny that some of us do, or penalties, if you will. And I think that's part of this overall system we need to start taking a look at.
Okay, thank you. I hope we can come to a solution on this, Spencer. We look forward to working with you on it. Committee, I appreciate the information and the questions today. I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 468. We did have another hearing scheduled. We will reconvene with that tomorrow morning, with that if the conferees are available. Committee, I do plan to work bills tomorrow too. I do know that there's some frustration that the tax committee hasn't been moving on legislation, but committee, we have a major override facing us. And until we know where we stand on that legislation, this committee is doing what they can to move forward, but hold firm on that legislation. Thank you.